Apologies for my accent out of the way, let's start with Derek. Derek actually gives us surprisingly a lot to work with if you dig deep enough. Derek is responsible beyond his years and has left his youth behind. The 1, 3, 5, 6, 7, 11 and 13. He seems to care a lot about others, especially those younger than him. The 4, 8, 10 and 16. He is also 2 years late to his studies, since he is 24 when he should have been 22. He seems to regret the time wasted, the 9, the 12. He probably was a full-time porn actor in those years. Considering his nature of responsible caregiver, he probably entered porn to provide for someone else. In this context, D2 and D14 suggest a lack of parental support dating back many years. Logical guess supported by D14. A traumatic event made him quit his porn career. Hard to make an exact guess as of now, but they say that a past boyfriend is not the most likely option, since the storyline has already been given to the also Red Taiga. Ace reminds Derek of someone. It's not likely that this someone is related to the traumatic event, since Derek feels comfortable enough to touch this person's shoulder, and it seems like Ace's resemblance to this mystery person is a good thing in Derek's eyes. With all of this considered, the most likely option for these mystery person identities will be for Derek to have a younger brother, with dyed hair, of about Ace's age. Thus, Derek had to raise and support his brother himself with his porn career once he was able to actually do porn. Now, this brother will be about 19, so he will be old enough to work too. If Derek's brother ended up in a field where he makes decent money without requiring higher education, he could support them both as Derek uses his savings and or a scholarship to go to university. His brother working would explain Derek's surprise when mistaking Ace for his own sibling. He probably thought he'd be at work. It also explains why Derek lets the club keep his share of the profit. He probably doesn't want his brother to know he's back into it. Considering what Derek's life seems to have been like, as well as D17, I can see that a major part of his arc will be learning to create new bonds, as well as mentoring the rest of the Jocks. Learning how to receive care, not just giving it, would also be a pretty important milestone for him. Now, for the child speculation part. I think I did a pretty poor job last time explaining this point, so time to make up. Only one thing before we start. Keep in mind that when I say child, I don't necessarily mean Derek's direct child he made himself with a woman, although this is a possibility depending on his exact position in the porn industry and or sexual orientation. When I say child or dead, I also mean any potential baby sibling or niece/nephew or some other kind of younger relative to which Derek would be, for all intensive purposes, a paternal figure too. Let's also just say from the start that, as of now, there is no evidence suggesting that this is the case, but it's also not completely outside the realm of possibilities. Why so? Having a theme of parenthood is decently common in the BL world, much like the superstar, the closeted guy, and the hyper-professional man, so I can see Blitz trying their hand with this trope as well. Giving Derek this storyline would make a lot of sense considering how caring and paternal he already is, similar towards everyone as suggested by the quiz answers, the 4, the 8, the 10, the 16, with the 16 specifically mentioning a baby. It would also add another layer to the onion example in D14. Not that having a child would be a misfortune within itself, but it would be another curveball in Derek's life. Although you could say that the way he cares about others is just the way he is, and to a certain extent you'd be right, I think dead brain, in short, fatherhood improves a man's ability to empathize, it's a real thing, look it up, would be a very cool explanation for the way Derek's worries about others. I also doubt that it's a problem for Derek to manage college life as well as being a parent. With his brother helping and his well-developed time managing skill, he'd be for sure used to hustle. This would be a fitting storyline for Derek, in my opinion, but I can also see the counter-argument that since he's so well-liked by the fandom, him being a parent could be a turn-off for many people, and thus not worth pursuing. Moving on to Leo. Leo's thing is definitely everything. The demo makes it very clear how much he likes to do stuff, especially with others. In fact, Ace does indirectly point out at their end-of-day conversation how burnout could be a major problem for Leo if he keeps to do so many things in one day. An insight into his way of thinking is given to us by L2 and L4, which kinda point to FOMO being a major factor in Leo's decision making. He's giving me low-key Pink Pie vibes from when her FOMO got so bad she cloned herself 1,000 times over. Part of the reason Leo's FOMO could be so intense could be due to what is hinted at in L1 and L5. Leo seems willing to do anything to be included in anything. I dare to say that he probably also doesn't care what it is most of the time. The root of the problem could be found in Leo's background. Being Hispanic/Latino/Filipino coded, I don't think it's a stretch to say that he could come from a big family. A hint for this to be the case is that Leo is the only Jock to mention a family member, being when he tells us only his mother can call him Julio, as well as L3 and L6 possibly pointing out to Leo's family as being an important part of his life. Since Hispanic/Latina/Filipino families tend to be not only large but also extended, I can see Leo also suffering from middle child syndrome. In this scenario, the root of this FOMO could be traced back to a childhood of feeling left out, and now that he's in college he'd be overcompensating. This is what I assume Leo and Ace will be working on for the majority of his route. Now for everyone's favorite anger issues boy. Starting with what's as evident as Bryce issues, he's a total frat guy. Brutish and masculine to the extreme as the website says, and he's clearly a fan of partying and drinking. Despite being an asshole, it's important to note that Bryce isn't homophobic, at least not towards others. He does belittle both Ace and Jocks, but that's mostly for being two loser nerds in his eyes. It has nothing to do with their sexualities if you read carefully. Now for the rainbow elephant in the room. Bryce says that he is straight, but thanks to the power of the fourth wall, we know that he's not! What a surprise! With the information given to us at the moment, it's hard to determine if Bryce hasn't realized it yet that he likes men, or he already knows it and is lying to others. For the purpose of this theory, it's not relevant, but it does set what seems to be a pattern for Bryce. Bryce is clearly lying to others about who he really is. B5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. Though not completely I think. He probably still likes to party and to drink, but there is clearly more to him that he lets on. At first glance, this may look just like the perfect setup for a classical white guy comes out story. But I think you'll agree with me when I say that one of the reasons why Blitz stories are so good is because they stray away from those kind of tropes that, at times, make other queer stories feel bland and predictable. Bryce coming to terms with his sexuality will probably be a part of the story, but I believe it's gonna be just another element of his character arc, among others. I also think he'll admit fairly early on to Ace that he likes guys, allowing their relationship to develop past that point for a greater portion of the game. Deep down, Bryce wants to be free to do the things he likes, as suggested by B2 and the already mentioned ones, yet he doesn't. He clearly built himself a box and is forcing himself in it. In Bryce's mind, exiting his box would lead to everybody he knows hating and humiliating him, which is his worst fear, B3. B11 also suggests there is no middle ground. He either keeps up the act and makes everyone love him, or everybody is going to hate him otherwise. I think this also points to how Bryce might be suffering from a case of main character syndrome, which, in case you don't know, is when someone thinks they're always at the center of attention. This fear, as I said, is probably not limited only to his sexuality, but it envelops most aspects of his life. If we keep our minds out of the gutter for a second here and assume that he doesn't just use the alternate account mentioned in B1 for that, we can assume that he probably uses it to anonymously have an outlet for the interests that don't match his persona. On what one of those unworthy interests might be, his handles actually give us a hint. Bryce is the only Jock to have themed underwear. His boxes have a comics pattern on them. It would be a discreet way to show his love for a hobby he'd otherwise tell others he finds nerdy, stupid and for losers. This might just be one of the many things Bryce hides from everyone, but he does give us an idea on how his mind works. As for the roots of Bryce's problem, I would exclude parental expectation. Again, it's just a tired trope. I doubt Blitz would like to tackle it. A much more interesting case would be if it's Bryce, and only Bryce, the one who decided that he has to be a certain way. B9 does maybe point at this being his own decision with where he lost it, but I think B7 is much more meaningful in this context. Bryce wanting to both live an authentic life and be an example might at first sound like one goal, but to Bryce they are probably two irreconcilable things. This means that for Bryce to be an example, He thinks he needs to be someone who is not, which probably means that he's copying someone else's example. Who this is hard to say, but I think we could make an educated guess. If you notice, Bryce is the only one among the jocks who keeps an article of clothing on during filming, that isn't a bracelet or necklace. This, along with B3, might suggest that his hat might be of sentimental value to Bryce, and thus be tied in some way to Bryce's role model, which at this point I can assume to be a family member, probably a father or a brother. I don't feel confident in pointing out exactly what led Bryce to believe that to be an example, he had to be exactly like his own example. It could be due to many factors, but whatever it is, it will probably highlight one of Bryce's key misbeliefs. Bryce probably doesn't realize that most people, especially the one he loves, don't really care who's Bryce into, what his hobbies are, or what he wants to do with his life, as long as he's the one happy with it. Moving on to something nicer, at least on the surface. After a long time, I finally feel like Zane doesn't elude me anymore. So what do we know about him? One thing is for certain, Zane likes to flirt. A lot. The website tells us he's a playboy, which is not hard to believe considering how much he likes to flirt and tease Ace. However, after looking at his route again, I can't help but feel like his interactions with Ace are a bit one note. It feels like every other line is flirting or teasing, but give me a minute and I'll explain why that's relevant. If we look at his casual outfit, we can see a lot of gold jewelry, plus the one down there. The rest of these clothes also look quite expensive. Along with Z1, Z2 and Z3, we can assume Zane can allow himself to have some pretty expensive taste, since it seems like his family is super well off. Despite this, he seems to be rather lonely, although it might not look like it from what we saw in the demo. If you look at some of the survey's answers that match him, Z4, Z8, it paints a pretty clear picture of a rather lonely person. Why is that so then? Well, there are some people who decided not to raise their children, and if these people happen to be rich, they can just send them off to nannies and tutors. If this is Zane's case, it would mean that all of his materials and academics needs would have been met, yet it wouldn't be the same for his emotional needs. Growing up surrounded by compensated caretakers and with your parents basically being strangers, usually doesn't do wonders for a child. All of this, along with the fact that Zane's good looks and rich status would have been a passepartout for anything and anyone he could ever want, would basically mean Zane never developed any actual social skills. The reason why he keeps flirting with Ace, and with everyone else, is because it's the only social interaction he knows how to pull off. This would inevitably make Zane a very superficial person, that doesn't know how to value feelings, like we see in Z6 and Z9. Despite this, he seems to be longing for an actual relationship, like we see in Z7, and his Z5 answer about money not bringing happiness might indicate that he actually feels frustrated with his life. Yet let's not be mistaken here. Zane will not be aware of this false of his. He knows that money doesn't make happiness, but he doesn't know why. He knows he can't hold down a stable relationship, but he doesn't understand that there is more beyond physical attraction. So might as well follow your lust as much as possible at that point. In this case, Z10 about reading his own mind would underline Zane's desire to understand himself better, while Z12 shows his like for people to act the way he wants them to. This is of course topped by the high opinion he clearly has of himself, like you can see in Z11, and the general confidence he shows, mostly in his solo performance. Ace would then have to teach Zane how to become a better person and to understand feelings, both of others and his own. However, in the process, I do believe Zane could end up hurting Ace somehow. Most likely when Ace understands that Zane was just playing with him, after being led to believe they had something real. Next up, our wettest boy Avan, who is known to be methodical, precise, reliable, and everything you'd expect a student council president to be. Even so, it doesn't mean that Avan doesn't get urges, as he puts it. However, it seems like the lustful side of Avan didn't get to shine much during the demo, but it's very clear he's pretty horny, as supported by his official description and by E1. Avan is definitely a pretty rigid person, as we can see when he first meets Ace, so it's a logical consequence he'd also not be the best socializer, E4. However, the rumors of his nasty reputation are probably due to something more than initial bluntness. Ace has probably only seen Avan's good side so far, but it seems like Avan could become a much nastier person at a moment's notice. This is suggested by E2 and E3, which don't seem to paint Avan in a positive light for a student council president. Receiving criticism, E2 when someone is in such a public position would be pretty common, and thus dealing with it in a healthy way would be pretty important. Yet when Avan is someone that holds grudges, E3, I can see him wanting things to be done in any other way but his way, making him pretty despotic when it comes to console business. I think we already have an example of what this might entail. The survey for the club has been done by Avan, as he himself admits it when talking about it with Ace. It does seem like Avan is the only person who worked on the survey, and it shows. The questions and the answer in it are a mix of socially awkward and horny, exactly what you expect from Avan. It almost seems like Avan made the questions subconsciously considering only the ones he'd like to see, suggesting a lack of understanding of other people's way of thinking that might have much deeper roots than just being bad at taking criticism. If you think about it, when naming such control freak as president, I don't think many students or council members will be willing to argue with Avan for hours on what to put in the survey. They probably have more important stuff to deal with, and by dealing I mean having to argue with Avan over it, but they probably also know that a few people would ever take the test anyway, since most students that go to a school like Olympus U probably already have that sort of stuff figured out. Let's just say that if Avan and Ace ever get into a fight, it's gonna be pretty horrible. In closing, Avan would thus be a socially awkward control freak, unwilling to back down on anything. This significant character flaw would not only help to differentiate him from the similar Natsumi, but also present quite the challenge for him to overcome even with Ace's help. With that said, it seems rather ironic that the control freak seems to be the one Jock who enjoys being controlled in bed the most. It will probably make a rather interesting contrast, which already seems to be a theme with Avan's sexy side, the opposition between his mannerism in bed and the way he acts in any other context. Last but not least, the crowd's favorite, Yuto. Yuto seems to have a pretty unique combination of attributes. He is very much coded to be neurodivergent. I don't think an exact diagnosis really matters for the purpose of this theory, but the fact that half of his route is him forgetting stuff and not understanding social customs proves a point that doesn't need to be proven. He also seems to be very caring, Y1, like when he brings Ace a rice bowl he bought for him off campus. So despite his hard time with social customs, and by extension social conflicts, Y2, he seems to be naturally empathetic towards most people. Yuto is also fully aware of his shortcomings, expressing it clearly with Ace at the end of the conversation. However, he also seems to have a lot of internalized hate for himself, while 3, 4, 5, and 6 paint Yuto as someone who is aware of how others see him, as a nuisance. A line from his official description, and Y3, however, might suggest that by Yuto's caring nature he might find fulfilling to make others laugh with his antics, but he might not understand that people laugh at him, not with him. Also tying back to his hard time with social customs, the fact that Yuto doesn't seem to have a solid grasp on this kind of problems, probably just ignoring them like Y2 suggests, likely means that growing up he didn't have a support system that allowed him to develop in accordance to his needs. Why is that so? Making a general assumption that as such will not always be true in all scenarios, Yuto is pretty clear of Japanese origins. Japanese society is kinda infamous for being a very collectivized one, where those who stray away from the crowd get ostracized. However, we know that Yuto's family does live in whatever generic western country Jock studio takes place in, since it's implied in the way he talks about his dog. But I wouldn't be surprised if Yuto's parents would steal all the values of their homeland / their parents' homeland, and when they raised their son, they would have pushed him to conform rather than to find his own way in life. This would not have been done out of malice on their part, since I doubt Yuto's parents are bad people. They probably thought it was the best for their son, when in actuality it wasn't. Rather interesting, when Yuto presents himself with his first grade style presentation, he only mentions his fam when he's talking about seeing his dog. Granted, Yuto is not a child, thus his world does not revolve around his parents as much as a 6-year-old's would. But it's pretty odd that he doesn't disclose any more about them when he wants to tell Ace all about himself. One's parents are a pretty important part of one's background, certainly more than blowing thoughts. Thus, it's likely that Yuto doesn't have a good relationship with his parents if he'd rather mention his dog over them. Working with Yuto to help him find his own way in the world, as well as helping to merge the gap between Yuto and his parents, is probably what Ace will end up doing in this route. Knowing Blitz, they may also make the dog die for good measure. Nothing better than having your pet die on you to stay the fan favorite, right, Yoichi? Before concluding, coming to before wrapping up, let's just take a quick moment so we can put all the points about Jocks being the villain of the game in one place. For starters, Jocks is having a hand behind his back, which is usually a sign of ulterior motives. He's not above using half-truths to get what he wants, like when he lied about Derek having joined the club when he still hadn't at that point. He seems to be motivated by money, so he probably founded Jock Studio for that reason. Despite this, he's wearing designer items, which is definitely odd, but not unexplainable like we saw with Emilia. Furthermore, since he's the one doing the behind-the-scenes work, he's in a position of power over the other Jocks. If things during the story will for whatever reason turn against him, he has a variety of ways to use the power recorder to blackmail the Jocks so they'll keep working for him. This will make him similar to the Greek god he's based off of, Hades, the ruler of the underworld, since he'll make the Jocks unable to leave the club, just like the souls can't leave the underworld. It's also worth noting that Matt is based off Hermes, the god who brings the souls to the underworld. So it's likely for Matt to be Jock's accomplice, and maybe even eventual lover, following the myth of Persephone. I can't exactly say how much Matt knows about Jock's true intents, but he probably already did something for him. Having singled out with his gaydar Ace as a good member of his club, Jocks could have given Matt the survey and told him to give it to his lazy best friend, so he can pick a club. This would make for a perfect opportunity for Jocks to show up and recruit Ace when he is turning in the survey, making it look like a chance encounter and ensuring a yes from Ace. In the future, Jocks could also manipulate Matt to make him gaslight Ace, so they'll not be a threat to Jocks' plans. Speaking of Ace, it would then be up to him to save his friends and boyfriend from Jocks' grasp. He could do it by coming clean to the school authorities about the club, but instead of mentioning Jocks, whose involvement cannot be proven, he'd shift all the blame onto himself, trying to get the rest of the Jocks out of trouble. In this sense, Ace would become the Orpheus of the story. The rest of the Jocks would then start their own Let's Prove Keitaru is Innocent quest to save Ace from the undeserved punishment, and hold Jocks accountable for what he did. Lastly, this quote from Bryce Roots smells like foreshadowing to me. I don't know about you, but well, it doesn't really matter, we all know what the club is about. And it's not like anyone is being forced to stay, right? This kinda smelled like foreshadowing to me. On a side note, guys, how many of you have bothered looking between Jock's legs? Because that thing to me looks like it's really, really, really big. And unless he hid something else in there, like a microphone or something, I think we might be in front of Blitzgame first ever Big Dick Twink. Which will probably be interesting.